Jackson Weller thought it was all fun and games when he mocked Pam Bondi's piano skills. But when the tables turn at a charity event, Pam's hidden talent leaves everyone, including Jackson, speechless. What happens next will shock you. Trust us, you won't see this coming. Watch till the end to see how this epic showdown unfolds. Chapter 1. The Roast Heard Round the World. Jackson Weller was on fire. The indie rock star had just dropped his latest podcast episode, and man, was it a burn. His voice oozed with that familiar arrogance as he ripped into Pam Bondi, the political figure everyone knew, but no one could quite figure out. The kind of woman who always played her cards close to the chest. The kind of woman who could sit through a public debate with a smile, but you never knew what was going on behind those eyes. But Jackson? He was a different animal. He wasn't afraid to call it like he saw it. And right now, he saw an easy target. Pam Bondi, on the piano? Jackson snorted into the mic. Please. She doesn't know a thing about music. I bet she couldn't tell a C chord from AD, if that's even a thing. Hell, I doubt she's even touched a piano in her life. The audience erupted in laughter, and Jackson leaned back in his chair, a smug grin plastered on his face. You know, if I were her, I'd just stick to politics and leave the music to the professionals. The words hung in the air like smoke, and Jackson basked in the glory of his own witty insult. But as the podcast continued, something dark started to stir behind the scenes, something Jackson wasn't prepared for. Pam was listening, but this wasn't the reaction Jackson was expecting. There was no fiery social media rant, no public clap back. Instead, Pam Bondi sat quietly in her office, the podcast playing softly on her phone. Her niece had sent it to her with a message. Aunt Pam, you gotta hear this. This guy's tearing you apart. Pam didn't flinch, didn't react. Not yet, anyway. She set the phone down on her desk and turned to face the grand piano sitting in the corner of the room. The keys glistened under the soft light, just waiting. Pam Bondi, the politician, had spent years building an image of calm and control. She'd played the game, said the right things, kept her personal life under wraps. But what Jackson didn't know was that Pam had another side to her, one that had been buried for far too long. The piano wasn't just an instrument. It was a part of her, a piece of her past. Her fingers hovered over the keys. Memories flooded her mind, her childhood, the hours spent practicing, the gentle encouragement of her parents. Music had been her first love, her first escape. But life had a way of pulling her in other directions. Politics, power, and the noise of the world crowded out the one thing that had always brought her peace. Pam took a deep breath, her fingers pressing down on the keys, the notes of Clair de Lune floating into the silence of the room. She hadn't played like this in years, but every note felt like it belonged. This wasn't about proving Jackson wrong, or about defending herself. It was about something much deeper. It was about reclaiming a part of her that she had forgotten, or maybe just put away for a rainy day. And as she played, she couldn't help but smile. She knew exactly what she was going to do next. Jackson Weller had no idea what was coming for him. Chapter 2. Pam's Quiet Storm. The calm before the chaos. Pam Bondi sat in the quiet of her office, the soft hum of her computer, the only sound breaking the silence. The podcast episode still played in the background, Jackson's voice mocking her with each passing second. She can't play piano. She doesn't know a thing about music. The words stung, but Pam didn't flinch. She didn't need to. Her niece's message buzzed on her phone. Aunt Pam, you need to hear this. You're getting roasted. But Pam didn't pick up the phone. She wasn't angry. She wasn't upset. She didn't even feel the need to fire back. Instead, her gaze shifted to the corner of the room where the grand piano sat, a silent reminder of who she used to be. For years, politics had been her world. Every decision, every move had been calculated. No room for mistakes, no room for distractions. Her life had been a never-ending game of strategy, power, and public image. But music? Music had always been there, quietly waiting for her. Pam stood up, walking slowly toward the piano. She ran her fingers lightly over the keys, as if testing the waters. The mocking words from Jackson still echoed in her mind, but they didn't hit the way he thought they would. Instead of anger, a sense of calm washed over her. She wasn't here to prove anything to anyone, especially not some arrogant musician with a microphone and a chip on his shoulder. She sat down and began playing the familiar melody of Clair de Lune, taking over her hands. The music was soft at first, like the gentle breeze before a storm. But as the notes filled the room, Pam felt something inside her shift. It wasn't about the politics or the public perception. It wasn't about Jackson's ignorant jab. It was about remembering who she was, a woman who didn't need to scream or shout to be heard. All she had to do was play. Her fingers moved effortlessly, each note more powerful than the last. It was as if the music had a life of its own, each key a part of her she had hidden away. She remembered being a child, her parents pushing her to be the best, encouraging her to keep playing even when the world outside felt chaotic. Music had always been her safe space, her escape. And now it was her weapon. Pam paused for a moment, her fingers resting on the keys. A smile tugged at her lips. She wasn't just going to sit back and take Jackson's insults. No, this wasn't just about a charity event or a public performance. It was about reclaiming something that had always been hers, something Jackson had no idea he was poking at. The calm before the storm had arrived, and Pam was ready. Jackson Weller had no idea what he was about to walk into. And Pam? She couldn't wait to show him. Chapter 3. Pam's Hidden Talent. The Secret Weapon. Jackson Weller was riding high on the attention his podcast had gotten. His social media feeds were blowing up with comments and memes about the piano disaster he'd made of Pam Bondi. He loved it. The more people laughed, the better he felt. But there was one thing Jackson didn't count on. Pam wasn't playing by his rules. What Jackson didn't know was that Pam Bondi wasn't some stiff politician who had spent her life avoiding criticism. She was a fighter, sure, but she wasn't some random target to pick on. Jackson had no idea that behind those tailored suits and carefully crafted speeches, Pam had a history that involved more than just politics. It all started when Pam was just a little girl. Music wasn't just something she did for fun. It was her first love, the one thing that truly spoke to her. She remembered the sound of the piano in her childhood home, the sharp click of the keys, the way they felt under her fingers. Her parents had recognized the spark in her early on, pushing her to practice, pushing her to be the best. She remembered the countless hours spent in front of the piano, playing for the love of it, not for an audience. There were no cameras, no microphones, just Pam and the music. But as she grew older, things changed. Politics had swallowed her up whole. The music faded into the background as she navigated the brutal world of power and influence. The piano became just another piece of furniture, a dusty relic of her past. Her focus was on strategy, speeches, and public perception. Music? That was for another time, another life. But Jackson's comments? They had cracked something inside her. At first, she thought about letting it go. After all, she had bigger things to deal with. But that old fire, the one she hadn't felt in years, was burning again. Jackson didn't know it, but he had just tapped into something way deeper than he realized. The piano wasn't just an instrument to Pam, it was her secret weapon, one she hadn't used in years. As she sat down at the keys in her office, the notes flooded her mind like a floodgate opening. She wasn't just playing the piano anymore. She was reclaiming her identity, her past, the very thing that made her who she was before the politics, before the public life. And she was going to let Jackson know exactly who he was messing with. Pam's fingers flew over the keys, hitting each note with precision and power. The music filled the room, a quiet storm gathering strength. Each key was like a silent challenge to Jackson, a reminder that there was more to her than the headlines. Jackson may have thought he had the upper hand, but he had no idea what he was about to face. She wasn't just practicing anymore, she was preparing for war. Jackson's roast? It was about to come back and bite him in ways he never saw coming. Pam wasn't angry. She wasn't out for revenge. She was just going to show him the one thing he would never expect, the quiet strength of a woman who had been underestimated for far too long. And Jackson? Well, He had no idea what he had just unleashed. Chapter 4. The Setup. Jackson has no clue what's coming. Jackson was feeling pretty damn good. His podcast roast of Pam Bondi had gone viral, and people were eating it up. He'd gotten a flood of new followers, his tour was gaining traction, and he was basking in the glow of his own sarcasm. For Jackson, life was looking up. Pam? She was just some stiff politician who couldn't keep up with the cool crowd. He figured she'd just roll over and let it slide. But there was one small detail he didn't know. Pam wasn't rolling over. What Jackson didn't realize was that the universe had its own plans. He had no idea that he and Pam would soon be thrown together at the same charity event, a night where they would both have to perform. He figured it would be just another boring gig. Show up, shake hands, play a couple of tunes, and get out. But this was going to be the setup of a lifetime. Pam had known about the event for weeks, but she'd kept it to herself. It wasn't on her radar as a chance for payback or revenge. No, Pam didn't need to get back at Jackson. She had already made her decision. She wasn't going to just let the world think she was some stiff, tone-deaf politician. She wasn't going to let some rock star talk down to her without showing who she really was. She would play and play well. Jackson would see the truth in the only language he understood, through the music. But Jackson? He was still clueless. He kept talking trash, throwing out more offhand comments about Pam's lack of musical ability in interviews, barely realizing how much he was digging himself into a hole. He was too busy running his mouth, thinking she wouldn't show up to the event with anything but a stiff smile and an awkward handshake. He was wrong. So wrong. When Pam finally made her way to the event, she didn't look like someone gearing up for a showdown. She didn't strut in with her head held high, ready to take down Jackson in a public feud. Instead, she was cool, collected, focused. She barely even acknowledged Jackson, who was still sipping his drink, chatting with anyone who would listen about his latest hit. But Pam? She wasn't there to talk. She wasn't there to smile and nod. She was there to show up and shut him down. She was there to remind him that she wasn't a joke. The evening went on, and Jackson was still high on the attention, the buzz from his podcast still fueling him. He didn't think twice about Pam. She wasn't even on his radar until it was time for the performances to begin. The stage was set, and Jackson felt the familiar rush of adrenaline. This was his night. He was going to play for the crowd, blow them away with his usual swagger. But what Jackson didn't know was that he was about to get a front row seat to a performance that would leave him speechless. The music wasn't just coming from him tonight. And Jackson Weller had no idea he was about to face an entirely different side of Pam Bondi, one he never expected. But it was already too late. The stage was set, the players were in position. And the moment he had mocked her, that was about to come back to haunt him. Chapter 5. The Challenge. Jackson's worst nightmare is about to go down. The charity event was in full swing, and the crowd was buzzing with energy. Jackson Weller stood by the bar, chatting with his usual crew, throwing back a few drinks and soaking up the attention. He hadn't even given Pam Bondi a second thought. To him, she was just another politician trying to stay relevant. But tonight, he was the star, the one everyone was talking about. The event? Just another gig to keep the ego rolling. But Pam wasn't here for small talk or to be part of the background noise. She had something else in mind, something that would make Jackson's smug grin disappear faster than his last drink. It all started when Jackson, maybe a little too buzzed from his earlier success, made the mistake of opening his mouth once again. I mean, let's be real here. Pam Bondi and a piano? That's comedy right there, he laughed, eyes scanning the room like he owned it. The only keys she knows are the ones to her office. The room chuckled, some even nudging each other, as Jackson continued his roast, oblivious to the woman standing just a few feet away. He didn't notice her until it was too late. Pam didn't flinch. She didn't give him the satisfaction of a reaction. Instead, she casually set down her drink, a slow smile tugging at her lips. Her eyes met Jackson's for a split second, but there was something in her gaze that made him pause. Was it a challenge? No, it couldn't be. Not her. But then, Pam walked toward the piano on the stage, her heels clicking softly against the floor. A hush fell over the crowd. Jackson didn't know what was happening at first. Why was she heading to the piano? Was she going to just stand there, waiting for her turn to smile and wave? He had no idea what he was about to witness. As Pam sat down, the audience's curiosity piqued. Jackson's eyes narrowed. What the hell was she doing? He expected her to start fumbling with the keys, looking out of place, maybe even awkward. But instead, something unexpected happened. Pam placed her fingers lightly on the piano and began to play. Slowly at first, the familiar notes of Clair de Lune filled the room. Jackson froze mid-sip. His hand stopped in the air. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, shocked by what they were hearing. It wasn't just any song, it was beautiful. Pam's fingers moved effortlessly over the keys, each note flowing like a river, smooth and precise. The room fell completely silent. People couldn't look away. Jackson, still standing by the bar, was no longer the center of attention. No, now it was all about Pam. And she was owning it. For the first time that night, Jackson felt the rush of heat in his chest, not the kind that came from a stage light, but the kind that comes when you realize you've completely misjudged someone.
His mouth went dry.
This wasn't some political figure fumbling through a song. This was a woman who knew exactly what she was doing. And Jackson Weller, with all his fame and bravado, had no idea what he was about to face. Pam's performance wasn't just a song, it was a statement. And Jackson had no idea how much he had just underestimated her. Chapter 6. The Showdown. Pam's Moment of Glory. Jackson Weller had always prided himself on being the center of attention. It came with the territory when you were a rock star with a loyal fan base. So when Pam Bondi sat down at the piano, he didn't expect much. If anything, he thought she'd play some soft, boring tune that would barely register. He'd made his joke, and in his mind, that was all she was, just another punchline. But the moment she began to play, everything shifted. The piano sang under her fingers, the notes flowing with the grace of a master. Clair de Lune wasn't just a piece of music, it was Pam's personal statement. Every note was a carefully aimed shot at Jackson's arrogance. She wasn't just proving him wrong, she was showing him up in front of the entire crowd. Jackson stood frozen, his drink hanging in midair. His eyes widened as the elegance of Pam's playing filled the room. It was like a slap to his face. So smooth, so effortless. This wasn't just some stiff politician playing a couple of keys. This was talent. Real talent. The crowd had gone silent. You could hear a pin drop as Pam's hands danced across the keys, each note sharper than the last. Jackson's smug grin had faded. The audience was no longer focused on him, but on the woman at the piano, who had just completely flipped the script. It didn't take long for Jackson to feel the heat in his chest, his heart pounding in his ears. His earlier cocky attitude was nowhere to be found. Instead, he felt like a fool. A rock star who had mocked a woman who clearly wasn't just a politician. Pam didn't look at Jackson as she played. She didn't need to. Her fingers were doing the talking now. Every chord, every phrase, seemed like a challenge, but not to the audience. No, this was a challenge to Jackson's entire perception of who she was. When the last note of Clair de Lune rang out, Pam's hands hovered above the keys for just a second before she gently lifted them. The silence in the room was deafening. Then, slowly, the crowd erupted into applause. People were on their feet, clapping and cheering, some even wiping away tears. Pam had completely stunned them. No one saw this coming. Not Jackson, not anyone. Jackson couldn't move. He had been knocked off his pedestal, the smug attitude wiped off his face in a single, perfect moment of music. For the first time in a long while, he was speechless. His mind raced, trying to process what had just happened. Was this really the same woman he had mocked just days ago? Pam didn't say a word. She simply stood up from the piano, her expression calm, collected, like she had just done something as easy as breathing. Jackson's eyes followed her as she left the stage, the crowd still buzzing with admiration. And as for Jackson, he was left standing there, completely exposed. His world had just been turned upside down by a woman with a piano, and it wasn't over yet. Chapter 7. The Apology. Jackson's humbling moment. The rest of the night felt like a blur to Jackson. He had never imagined a scenario where he'd be left in the dust like this. There he was, the golden boy of indie rock, standing on the sidelines while Pam Bondi, of all people, stole the show. Her piano performance had left him rattled, his earlier arrogance crumbling under the weight of her raw talent. It wasn't just that she'd proved him wrong, it was the way she had done it. No flair, no need for validation, just pure, unadulterated skill. As the night wore on, Jackson couldn't shake the feeling that everyone in the room could see right through him. He'd been exposed, and the more he thought about it, the worse it got. His mind replayed the moment over and over. The shocked silence when Pam played, the stunned look on his face as he realized just how wrong he'd been. Every laugh he'd gotten from mocking her now felt hollow, like an empty victory that had turned into a crushing defeat. Finally, it got to be too much. Jackson couldn't stand it anymore. He needed to do something, anything to fix this. So he did what he never thought he would. He walked up to the microphone right in the middle of his performance. The crowd fell silent, sensing something big was about to happen. "I gotta say something." Jackson's voice cut through the quiet. He hesitated for a second, not sure how to put his pride aside. But the truth was, there was no way out. His earlier confidence had evaporated, replaced with something he hadn't felt in a long time: humility. "I've been a real jerk, all right? I've made fun of Pam. I thought she couldn't play a lick of piano. And I was wrong. Straight up wrong." There was a moment of stunned silence. The crowd had no idea where this was going, but Jackson's sincerity was unmistakable. "What I didn't know was that Pam's not just some politician. She's a musician. And not just any musician. She just blew me out of the water, and I gotta own that. So, Pam, if you're out there listening, I'm sorry. For real. I've learned the hard way." The room was dead quiet. The only sound was the faint clink of glasses and the hum of conversation from the bar. For a moment, it seemed like time had stopped. Jackson had just publicly admitted he was wrong, and it wasn't just a casual apology. It was raw, real, and vulnerable in a way Jackson had never shown before. As Jackson looked around, he saw the faces in the crowd, some of them nodding, some even smiling. They weren't laughing at him. No, they were respecting him. Respecting his ability to admit he'd messed up and owning it. It wasn't a perfect moment, but it was real. Jackson glanced toward the side of the room, and his eyes met Pam's. She wasn't smiling, but she wasn't scowling either. She simply gave him a slight nod, acknowledging the apology without needing to say a word. That was enough. For Jackson, this moment was a turning point. He had been humbled in front of everyone. But the weird thing was, it felt good. There was no fake bravado now, only the truth. And the truth, as Jackson was beginning to realize, was the one thing that could set him free. As the music started again, Jackson took a deep breath, his shoulders finally relaxing. He wasn't the same man who had walked into the room that night. He had just learned a lesson that he wouldn't forget anytime soon. Sometimes, you have to swallow your pride and admit you were wrong. Chapter 8. The Aftermath. Jackson learns the hard way. The days after the charity event felt like a blur for Jackson. It was as if the entire world had shifted, and he was left trying to catch up. His apology, raw and real, had become the talk of the town. Some people were impressed. Some people respected him for owning up to his mistake. Others? Well, they were just waiting for him to slip up again. Jackson knew he'd probably never be seen the same way, but that was okay. At least he didn't have to pretend anymore. What struck him most, though, was how his perspective had changed. He wasn't the cocky, arrogant musician he once was. That guy was gone. Now, Jackson was the guy who'd learned the hard way that there was always more to someone than meets the eye. And sometimes, the hardest lessons come from the most unexpected places. Pam's performance at the charity event had gone viral. Every clip, every snippet of her playing Clair de Lune was shared across social media. People were blown away by her talent. Political views aside, Pam Bondi was now being praised for something completely different: her piano skills. People couldn't stop talking about it. Jackson, on the other hand, was just trying to process it all. How had he missed that side of her? How had he been so quick to judge? One night, after scrolling through post after post praising Pam, Jackson sat on his couch, staring at the screen. It was a strange feeling, admiration mixed with guilt. He had underestimated her, made jokes at her expense, and for what? To feel better about himself? To look cooler to his fans? It hadn't worked. If anything, it had made him look like an idiot. It wasn't just the online buzz that had gotten to him. Jackson found himself thinking back to the night of the event. The way Pam had stood up there, cool as a cucumber, and played that song. She didn't need to boast or make a scene. Her talent spoke for itself. She wasn't trying to prove anything. And that, in a world full of loud, brash egos, was something Jackson deeply respected. He found himself doing something he hadn't done in years. Picking up the piano. At first, it was just to pass the time, a way to kill the silence. But soon enough, it became a challenge. He wasn't trying to outdo Pam or show off. No, Jackson was just trying to learn, to see if he could find the same kind of quiet strength she had shown. Maybe he could understand it better, feel it in his own hands. His fingers fumbled over the keys, but he didn't care. For the first time in a long time, Jackson Weller was humbled by something more than fame or praise. It was about the music, the real stuff. No gimmicks, no flashy performances. Just him and the piano. The way Pam had played, without a care in the world about anyone's opinion, made Jackson realize that there was power in humility. The truth was, he didn't need to be the loudest person in the room to be heard. Maybe, just maybe, he could learn to be as confident as Pam, not through words, but through actions. And while the world buzzed about Pam's performance, Jackson knew that his journey was only just beginning. The lesson she had unknowingly taught him wasn't just about the piano. It was about life. And that, Jackson realized, was worth more than any applause. The last laugh, Jackson's ultimate lesson. Jackson Weller thought he had it all figured out, until one woman with a piano flipped his entire world upside down. From mocking her to humbling himself, Jackson learned the hard way that talent can't be measured by fame, and that real strength doesn't need to shout. Pam Bondi, with nothing but her music, showed him what it really means to be powerful. But that wasn't the end. Jackson's journey had just begun. Will he become the man he once mocked, or will he stay the same? Only time will tell. If you're curious to see what happens next, don't miss out. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you're the first to hear the next twist in this story. You won't want to miss it.